Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Sunday, August 11th, 2024, and today we are going to be talking about the state of Washington and its partisan primary that took place just around a week ago. As all of the results start to pour in, we're at 94% in total reporting here, nearing 99%, a massive overperformance in a primary that is often a good indicator of what Democrats might expect to see in their upcoming November election. For the past decade, midterm or presidential elections, Democrats have not seen a strong performance like this one since the 2008 presidential election. The state of Washington has shown that Democrats are in a very strong position going straight into November, and in a year where we don't have many special elections, or really any elections between now and November to give us indicators of real election results, we're pretty much focused on just what we get out of these partisan primaries. And Washington, as it was an indicator in 2020, 2022, 2018, and even 2016, these primary results show very favorable results for the Democratic Party and Vice President Kamala Harris. Now, the way the Washington primary system works is it's one of the few states with an open primary system where inevitably we'll end up, likely at least, with a Democrat and Republican in a November election. But regardless of your partisan affiliation, you are up against every other contender in the state, meaning if you're an independent candidate or a Republican or a Democrat or a Libertarian, you are fighting for that nomination in the top two spots, which moves over to a runoff in the November race. And so we've actually seen this implemented in some other states, especially large ones like California, which have a jungle primary system. It's very similar here. Washington is the same exact way here, and that allows us to start to see exactly what we're finding in terms of Democratic and Republican turnout, and again, where we start to see indicators of enthusiasm and who's excited to get out to vote for their respective candidates, knowing that it is sort of a signaling race against the opposition party of which they are voting for or against. Now, Washington's primary with the Democratic Party at this point showing Democrats roughly 16 points ahead of the Republican Party on the overall net vote. And that's really good news for the Democrats. It shows that on the total branch of things, the Democratic Party has really turned out in multiple congressional districts in a way that shows really good results not only for the presidential race, but down-ballot Senate and House races. The Washington primary is an indicator because it has gone back in history to show that Republicans in some cases have narrowed up the open primary and narrowed up races that maybe should otherwise be pretty solid for Democrats, leaving indicators that Democrats might be on pathways to victory or losses in key states. In 2010, we saw that the Washington primary was a very early indicator that the Democratic Party was going to lose massive amounts in the United States House and the United States Senate. And so it was. Same thing in 2012, and 2014, and 2016, and most recently in 2022, it was an indicator that Democrats were going to be in a position where the race was going to be more competitive than otherwise than Republicans were hoping for. Republicans were hoping for a very strong victory. They're hoping to be in a position where they were able to have a blowout like they did in 2010 and arguably even in 2014, and the 2022 results did not show that. And so the Washington primary benchmarks here, as are summarized by very big political scientists. I mean, it's not just this singular Twitter user. You can find it throughout the page, but you pretty much find that the benchmarks here show that Republicans, if they were to see a narrowing up of the race where Democrats only had a 10-point advantage, keep in mind Biden won the state by 15 points in the last race, just a 10-point advantage, it would be a very Republican year. Getting around to the Democrat plus 10 to 12 point, it'd be somewhere between 2020 and 2022. Republicans won the popular vote in 2022 by 3 points. Democrats won the popular vote in 2020 by roughly 4 points in the generic congressional ballot. Anywhere from Democrats plus 13 to 16 shows a similar environment to 2020. And if you're getting a bit of a recap on that, remember back in 2020, Democrats won House control with 222 seats, and anything beyond that, Democrat plus 17 or above, would indicate a very Democratic year. And so what we find in the Washington results here is the Democrats are exactly at 17%, a 16.7% delta between the Democrats and the Republicans. And supposedly the outstanding vote from what we have seen thus far has actually started to boost the Democratic Party's total vote share and the delta between the Democrats and the Republicans. And again, really good news for the Democratic Party. To be in this position helps us understand more about the election process beyond what the polls are saying, the enthusiasm numbers are saying, the fundraising data is saying, because it is very rare that before a November election, especially 80 days out, we are getting numbers from real election results. It is very rare that even there would be a special election, even in the event that a member of Congress or a state legislative race or a governor race, if someone even had passed away or suddenly retired, very often these races get pushed right into November. And so this is an amazing opportunity for us to actually understand, what does this data tell us? How does it help us understand what we're looking at for the 2024 race? And pretty much the TLDR on this one is that the Democratic Party does in fact come out ahead to a point where they can look at the 2020 2020 House results and say we may even do better than what 2020 showed, which would be a really good result for the Democratic Party, considering the Republicans most recently won House control back in 2022. And the Washington results here aren't just an indicator for people who are looking for an obscure reason to justify why Democrats might do well in 2024. There are a lot of people who look at these results to help understand and inform their own predictions in this election cycle. And you can find it to be really interesting when you look at Polymarket, which is pretty much our political betting market, the organization that looks at chances for the Democratic Party, Republican Party in different House races, and people actually spend their money on this race. So a lot of the times they're removing their own personal bias. As much as a Republican might want Democrats to lose a state like New York or California, they know that Republicans aren't going to win there, and so they're of course going to bet on Democrats winning in that state. And so on the House control front, you can see that before the Republican pretty much poor performance, I would say Republicans had a lackluster, if not abysmal performance in the Washington primary. Right before then and right around then, the Democratic Party saw themselves skyrocket in terms of overall chances, going from roughly a 55% chance back in where we were on August 3rd, August 4th, August 5th. The primary hits. Today, Democrats are at 64%. That is a massive uptick over a very short period of time. And it didn't just extend to what we saw in the House results. People looked at Washington as an indicator of what we might expect on the presidential level. If Democrats are to win the national popular vote the same way they did in 2020, a map like this one actually expands to Democrats winning in Arizona and Georgia. And even though it may be narrow, it would still be a substantial victory for Vice President Harris, defeating Donald Trump for a second time that she was on the ticket. And so a 5-point national victory here for Democrats, again, also would say that in the Senate races, Arizona would be on lock, Pennsylvania would be on lock, Wisconsin would be on lock, Michigan, some other states that would be more competitive without a national environment that's Democrat plus 5. Republicans have been hoping that Donald Trump would carry them across the finish line not only on the presidential, but also in many important down-ballot races. They had hoped that because the assassination attempt failed, because of the RNC, because Donald Trump had different surrogates joining his ticket, because so many different things were happening that were really negative for Joe Biden and the Democratic Party, that it might allow Republicans to not only win the presidency, but bring back the trifecta that they had won back in 2016. But now, when you take a look at even the political betting markets, the odds of the Democratic Party having a trifecta are roughly even with what the Republicans were. In the immediate aftermath of the assassination attempt on former President Trump, there was a 55% chance that Republicans would have a clean sweep, win the Senate, win the House, and of course, win the presidency. Today, that has dropped to just a 28% chance. On the flip side, Democrats went from a point where around the assassination attempt, the likelihood at which they had won a trifecta was at 14%. Today, it has nearly doubled to 27%, again running even with where we are for the Republicans on the national level. And when it comes down to the Democratic presidential, Kamala Harris, for the first time ever in the history of this polymarket, the history of the 2024 election cycle, Democrats now have the majority chance at victory. Even when it was Joe Biden, he never hit a majority against Donald Trump. So Kamala Harris being at 52% is a massive, massive uptick, again, from where we were in the immediate aftermath of the assassination attempt on Donald Trump. Kamala Harris had a 6% chance of the presidency. So going up to 52% is quite significant. And a lot of this happens because people look at data like what we see in Washington, and they understand that looking at the historical results for the Democratic Party, it goes to show that Democrats are in a much better position. The overall number here is that Democrats are at 58%. In 2012, when Obama won re-election, it was 51%. In 2016, when Hillary Clinton lost the election, it was 48%. And even in 2020, when Joe Biden won the race, Democrats were at 53%. So 51, 48, 53, the numbers there were fine for Democrats in 2012, not so good in 2016, better in 2020, but better than ever in 2024. And that is what matters for this cycle. And so the analysis on this really has been the Democrats are strongly overperforming from where it was back in 2022, in 2020, 2018, and even 2016. And even in 2022, if you remember, when we were looking at the Washington results in the Senate race there, you might remember that Republicans had been hoping that Washington was going to be competitive. And why was it going to be competitive? Because they had looked at the numbers in the polls and said, it's all of a sudden going to be a battleground state. FiveThirtyEight had Patty Murray up 4.7%. Real Clear Politics had her up 3 points. The final results? She ended up winning by roughly 15. And so that, of course, is something that helps inform my understanding of how these primary results really go to show that Democrats are in a position that is favorable. Because just based on the primary results, it was an indicator, sure, that Republicans were going to do better than 2020, but not that Washington would be this competitive. And the fact is, Republicans over-exaggerated what might have been happening in Washington, the same thing that they're doing in 2024. Republicans are far, far, far too overconfident and ignored the very real signs that told us that 2022 was going to be far more favorable for Democrats than we could have expected. Every single special election that happened post-Dobbs, Nebraska's 1st district, Mike Flood, the elected representative from that district, won by 5 points in a district Trump won by double digits. We saw it happen all across the country. Many other special elections, Democrats narrowed up those House races. In some cases, like Alaska, they flipped House races from Republican to Democrat. Alaska flipped for the first time since before Roe v. Wade was put into law. 1972 was when Don Young, the Republican who ended up passing away in office, that was where Mary Peltola stepped in and ended up winning winning the nomination for the Democrats, and then ended up winning the election. Point being, Alaska had been held by Republicans by a singular Republican for 50 years. And then in 2022, in an August special election, it was a very big indicator the Democrats were on track to do far better than the polls, than the pundits, than anyone could even have predicted. But a lot of us ignored that. And I will admit, too, I fully expected Republicans to win Senate control, win House control, and sweep multiple governorships. The fact is, what we knew from the Washington results, if we had just stuck to that, and many of the other election results, real election results, rather than just strictly hypotheticals, would have given us a much better understanding of how this race was going to go. And that's exactly where we missed the mark and what we're trying not to do for this election cycle. And so that's why I put a lot of stock in the results that we see out of states like Washington that give us very good indicators and have historically been exceptionally accurate in predicting how Democrats do in elections in very competitive races and not competitive races. Washington is this bellwether state that the primary results often foretell exactly what we're seeing on the side of enthusiasm and engagement in a presidential race. Had this been a Joe Biden versus Donald Trump race, I could imagine Democrats being somewhere around 51, 52% of their respective vote within the state. Again, they're at 58% right now. That is really, really good news for the Democrats. And when I look at the national numbers, I'm in a position where I'm starting to think back to 2022, that the national numbers might actually suggest we're in a closer race than what we actually are in. Again, don't get me wrong, I fully expect Kamala Harris to win the presidency right now, but not by much. My most recent map has Donald Trump at 262 electoral votes to Kamala Harris's 276. This is by no means a blowout. But when I look at the national numbers, and I remember what they were in 2022, when Republicans not only were leading in the polls by 2.5 nationally, but won by 2.8% nationally, it still translated to Democrats winning by 5 in Pennsylvania and 15 in the governorship, winning by 5 in Arizona and by a point in the governorship, winning by 2 in Georgia and then again in the runoff election, winning in Nevada despite not a single poll in the final 3 weeks of the campaign showing Democrats ahead. A big problem here was that we were under the assumption that all of these polls were entirely accurate and the national numbers did line up with what we were seeing in the statewide results. But the fact is, in these battleground states, Democrats did come out ahead, despite what the national numbers were saying, and they really didn't make sense. It was an election like no other, but now they're starting to become more and more like what we're seeing in a post-Dobbs era, where the baseline here is that Democrats, in fact, do well, and not Republicans do well in low turnout races. The baseline being that Democrats are excited and have a reason to turn out because of issues like abortion and healthcare and bodily autonomy, things that Democrats never really had to consider when voting in a presidential election to the way they do now. This is the first presidential election since the Dobbs decision since Roe v. Wade was overturned, Dobbs' decision ruled into precedent, and so the Democrats now have a very new thing that they can campaign on in a way they weren't able to do. They did it in 2022 successfully, won numerous governorships, did even better than 2018. To put that into context, I mean, that was a Democrat plus 8 year, and Republicans won the popular vote by 3 in 2022. The potential of the Democratic Party, had they had a 2018-style generic popular vote, Democrats would be at 250 seats in the House of Representatives and would have seen, potentially some narrowing in this race, but would have been a much, much better position than what they ended up being in the House races there. But again, it went to show that the Democratic Party had a newfound untapped energy and enthusiasm. And now, with Vice President Harris on this ticket, it very much seems like we're back in this position. And the Washington results reaffirm exactly what we've known from the new enthusiasm polls, the new fundraising data, the new volunteer hours. Every indicator from Democrat and Republican campaigns showed that Democrats and Kamala Harris are outpacing Republicans by nearly every single metric. And the real election results say exactly what we've known, is that Kamala Harris is on track to win this election should nothing change between now and November. And while American politics is very volatile, I will admit that, things that can happen in just around a month. I mean, we were talking about so much happening between the presidential debate and Joe Biden dropping out of the race. That was less than 1 month apart, even though it felt like an entire year. At the same time, we've sort of come to a point where there's only one more convention left. There is a few presidential debates and not much happening between then and November. And based on the momentum that has been built, maintained, sustained, whatever you want to say about the momentum on Kamala Harris's side, her numbers are getting better. Her approvals are getting better. Her chances and odds are getting better in this election. And everybody knows it. The people with money, the people at 538, the pollsters, the American public. The perception around Kamala Harris and her candidacy is that she is on track for victory, and the real election results, like the ones we see in Washington, reaffirm that and tell us that Kamala Harris and the Democratic Party are in a far better position than what Republicans might have thought just a few weeks ago, potentially 6 months ago, even a few days ago. Democrats are now in a position where they can win this race by potentially even more than they did in 2020, something that would have never happened under a Joe Biden presidency. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the top left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist of my 2024 presidential election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.